Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is RJ Palladino, Senior Program Manager at New Jersey Transit, and working with a really dedicated team of professionals to help advance the NewBus Newark effort. And on behalf of New Jersey Transit, I really want to thank you for coming out today. We see NewBus Newark and the bus redesign effort as a priority for NJ Transit and a real opportunity to improve service and the travel experience for our customers. We're very excited to have you here today. We're very much looking forward to hearing from you. As I mentioned to some people earlier, we had an afternoon session. We had really good participation, and I'm sure we'll have good participation today. We have NJ Transit team members here to listen to your concerns and help guide the planning process. We also have an excellent consultant team, Transportation Management Design Inc., or TMD. They're a nationally recognized firm specializing in bus redesign efforts, and they're really top notch, and we've got a good team working on this, and it's a priority for us. So if we could go to the next slide. So there are sometimes some downsides to doing all remote meetings and the COVID-19 environment, but one thing that's good is we get to do these instant polls, and you're going to see a poll that's coming up right now. The way these will work, you can vote on them. There's no wrong answer, but we use these as a way to gauge people's concerns, where they see priorities. You can answer the question. This is a pretty basic question, but what do you see as the most important role for public transit? Providing mobility options for people who cannot drive or afford a car, reducing traffic congestion, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or transporting people to and from work. And the good part about how we do these polls is that we're going to actually get to see the results immediately as soon as we close out that poll. So we'll give it just another minute. Again, what is the most important role for public transit? Providing mobility options for people who cannot drive or afford a car, reducing traffic congestion, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or transporting people to and from work. We'll give that 5 more seconds. And I'll ask the team to close out the question and show us the results. Okay, and I think this was pretty similar to what we saw in the last session. What was seen as the most important by 50% of the people who responded, providing mobility options for people who cannot drive or afford a car. Looks like reducing traffic congestion and greenhouse gas emissions are pretty close to one another. Interestingly, transporting people to and from work, not necessarily identified with this group as being the most important option. And I think that's something that we're starting to hear some from as we've been doing our work. So let's move in to the next slide, please. So for today, we're going to provide you an overview of key findings from analysis. We've been crunching numbers, taking a look at ridership trends long-term, some of that being pre-COVID, and also looking at how ridership has shifted during COVID. So we have some base understanding of how service is operating today. And we also did a passenger and non-passenger survey to get people's opinions on what they want to see out of bus service in the region. What we really want to talk to you today about is trade-offs and network redesign efforts. And trade-offs, it can be about resources, but sometimes it's just about what do you see as being important. Do you see it important to have a very fast trip or lots of bus stops for convenient access? Both are good, but the balance between those two can affect your travel experience. So what we really want to hear, and we're going to take you through it in a little bit of a structured way to think about what some of those trade-offs might be and hear from you what you think about those trade-offs. Next, please. So in terms of our project goals, we have some pretty basic goals, but I think important goals for the project. And the first is that we want to redesign the bus network in the Newark region to better align with customer needs and within our available resources. We want to make sure that every bus that we put out there, every trip that we make, is maximized to the best extent possible. It's best for our customers and it's best for the agency. It really can be a win-win. We want to enhance the customer experience, how people experience the service, what they find convenient about it, what they would like to see better, different, is all part of what we're looking at when we're doing this study. We definitely want to ensure inclusive and equitable mobility, connecting individuals and communities to key destinations. And some of the things that we'll talk about is what are those key destinations, and there are some things that we're looking at right now, and we've begun to hear back on the survey. And then finally, for us, it's important that we look at reversing intrastate bus service ridership declines within the study area. We know there is still a really strong market and a demand for a service out there. Not all the lines reflect that, and we want to see what we can do to change that dynamic going forward. Next, please. So why now? First, the bus network has been largely unchanged for decades. We make service changes. We make plenty of service changes all the time, but we haven't really had an opportunity to do this soup to nuts. What should the bus service look like for the region? And that's the difference in the approach and what we're doing in this instance right now, is to really take a look at what should bus service be doing in the greater Newark area today. We know the population travel patterns have changed. So is the service really aligned with those travel patterns and population? And we know layered on top of that, COVID-19 has changed demand. Some of it may be reverting back, some of it may be permanently changed. So it's something we have to think about as we go forward. NJ Transit, even pre-COVID, looked at, in our 2030 strategic plan, called for a redesign of the bus network. And we're starting in Newark. One of the markets that's very important to us because we have a lot of service out here, but we do intend to be progressing this type of work in other markets and other regions within New Jersey. And again, as I said earlier, we want to deal with addressing year-over-year ridership decline that we've seen on some lines. Again, maximizing that service is better for our customers and better for the agency. Next. So here are some key milestones so you understand sort of where we are in the process. In the fall and early winter, we did a lot of evaluation of where the service is today, taking a look at ridership, taking a look at trends that we see, as I said, both pre and post-COVID, taking a look at how people ride the system where we serve. We also did that surveying, talking to customers and non-customers about what they see as needs for public transit service. We have our goal setting and service strategies, which is really where we are today. And that's to look at what are priorities for people when they think about bus service in the greater Newark area. We hope to be back out later this spring with draft service recommendations, and we would look to be reconnecting with you at that point in time. And then final service recommendations towards the end of the summer. Throughout this, we have an ongoing effort for stakeholder and public involvement. We've been doing a lot of stuff. We've had mailers, meetings with key stakeholders, including elected officials, business leaders, community groups, educational institutions, and others. I'm sure there's more out there, and you may find us knocking on your door sometime, wanting to connect with you and have you involved in the project, and we very much welcome that. We have a dedicated project website, email, and social media. I will say with our website, we've recently made some changes to the project website, and we have a lot more information. So if you go to njtransit.com/NewBus, you'll find more information. Even if you visited it, let's say Monday or Tuesday this week, there's more on there today. And we're having meetings like this to talk to the public and talk to our customers. So really different ways that we can communicate. We want to hear from you. That's why we're here today. Let's go to the next slide. So particularly this study right now, what we're looking at is evaluating 38 NJ Transit routes that serve into Newark. Some of them are pretty exclusively within Newark. Some come from outer areas coming into Newark. Some actually serve people who may live in Newark but want to get to jobs at distant locations. So it really spans the gamut, but it's 38 routes here in Newark, and they're largely what we consider to be local routes traveling within New Jersey. The things that we look at: where do these routes go? When do these routes operate? And how often do these routes operate? These are the real critical building blocks of how we structure service and how our customers experience service. So that's what we're trying to do today, is understand, we know what we do, how does it meet needs, where does it fall short, what can we do to make it better? So with that, I'm going to move into the next section. I'm actually going to transfer it over to Melissa Sather with TMD. She's going to take you through the next portion of the presentation.
Again, thank you for coming out. And Melissa, I'm gonna let you take that away. Thank you.
All right, thank you, RJ, and good evening, everyone. So we wanted to start by sharing with you a little bit of the work we've done to date, some of the information that we've looked at and gathered during the first part of the study to get some background information. First thing we looked at is who NJ Transit riders are. And what we learned is that most riders are frequent users using the bus five or more days a week, really relying on it for daily travel. You have 44% of riders who don't have access to a private vehicle, meaning they may not have alternate modes of travel. And most riders are also low income, earning annual household incomes of $35,000 or less a year. What we also found is that 70% of NJ Transit bus riders use the bus to travel to and from work. And when we looked at all travel being made throughout the region, driving trips, walking, biking trips, we found that only 37% of trips are being made for work. So why is it that transit trips are kind of more heavily geared towards work when there are lots of other trips like medical, grocery shopping, running errands, socializing with friends that aren't really being made on transit? Is there a way to make transit more attractive for those types of trips? So that's one of the questions that we'll be exploring. It's really important to look at where riders are using the network and how they're using the network today. So we did a really extensive look at every single route, looking at where people ride and how that service is performing, which trips are being used, which trips aren't being used. We found that the 38 routes carry 180,000 riders each weekday. And I will note that all of the data that we're looking at was pre-COVID. So it's from the fall of September and October 2019, understanding that that represents sort of a baseline of existing conditions, but that some travel patterns may change as we emerge from the pandemic. We found that the top 20 stops carry 1 in 4 of the service area boardings. So 26 of all boardings in the entire area occur at just 20 locations. And this includes places like Broad Market Street, Newark Penn Station, the airport, Irvington Bus Terminal, key hubs where riders are transferring between different services. 57% of boardings on these routes take place within the city of Newark boundaries, which means that most activities happening within the city, but there's also a lot of activity happening from people in outlying areas who are either traveling, within the communities or trying to get into downtown. In addition to looking at the service side, we also look at the market side. Where's the demand for public transit in the Newark area? And we look at really 3 different things: is the density of an area. Are there enough people present in one location who need to travel that's going to make bus service cost effective? And then destinations. Is there a mix of places that people want to go? There's a mix of housing and jobs and retail together that's going to provide bus riders a variety of places to travel to. And then finally, what is the nature of the design of the built environment? Is the area walkable? Can you conveniently walk out to the bus, without it, is the pedestrian environment safe? Are you trying to cross major highways? Or is the area really auto-centric and, there's a very limited number of people who can even walk out to a major street served by a bus? So we're really going to be looking at these development patterns and how the demand for transit, who lives there, what destinations are available, and what the built environment looks like to determine where transit can be most successful. So we conducted a survey at the end of January, beginning of February, asking riders, non-riders, former riders, what service improvement was most important to them. And we want to launch the same poll and ask everyone the same question. Which service improvement is most important to you? Is it having a shorter walk to and from the bus, having a shorter travel time, fewer transfer connections, access to more frequent service, longer service hours, which could either mean earlier in the morning or later in the evening, lower fare pass prices, or fewer late trips, more services on time, you can get where you need to go. So I'm going to let these poll questions come in, or these responses come in. And I do believe it looks like most people have voted. So I will end polling and share these results. So these results are a little bit different than what we got last time. So this time we actually had a tie between more frequent service and shorter travel times. And I would encourage you, just as we're going through these polls, we do have the Q&A feature. And so if you want to let us know why you made the response that you did, what's important to you, as we're going through the presentation, we're going to be answering those questions. So we do really encourage you to share with us why you made chose the answer that you did. In the first session, we had a really high number of responses for more frequent service, and everything else is pretty much tied. So these results are interesting, a little bit different, where shorter travel time is equaling more frequent service. So let's see what the results from the survey actually were. So the most wanted service improvements from current riders was more frequent service. So 42% of riders selected more frequent service as their top desired service improvement, outweighing all the other categories by at least 3 to 1. The next and most important were lower fare pass prices and longer hours of operation. So why is it that frequency is so important? Well, it really comes down to the fact that most riders want to be able just to make the trip when they want to travel. They don't want to have to consult a schedule, and look up and say, okay, my next bus is going to come in 35 minutes. Where am I going to wait? Do I have a safe place to wait? Especially with more than half of all trips requiring a transfer, it's really undesirable to have long waits at unknown locations, where you're not in the comfort of your own home or workplace. So let's take a look. How frequent is service today? So we know we want more frequency, more service and shorter travel times. So what does service look like today? You see in the chart here, this is showing the number of routes operating at different frequency levels by time of day. So the yellow and the green in the chart on the left are your kind of peak commute times, early morning, late afternoon. And here you have a fair number of routes that are operating, every 2 to 7.5 minutes. But as the day, you get later in the day, you have the midday between like 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. or the evening or late evenings. Most routes are really running every 30 minutes, maybe every hour. And that level of service, isn't really frequent enough to be able to just, walk out the door and catch the next trip. So our goal with frequent service is really to have service better than every 10 to 15 minutes. So it's never too long between your next trip. And then in the map on the right, this is showing, where the frequency is concentrated. And you have, frequency on key corridors like Bloomfield and Springfield. And then as you move out into suburban communities, you have less frequent service because, as we looked at earlier, there's lower density, there's fewer numbers of destinations, and areas that are more auto-centric are harder to serve efficiently with robust levels of transit service. So RJ talked about trade-offs in service design. We know we want to add more frequency. We know we want to improve service. And if we're going to do that, we're going to be adding more vehicles to the route. And when we add more vehicles, this comes at a cost. And so NJ Transit, like most agencies, has limited resources. And so if we want to increase costs and invest in one part of the network, we have to find resources somewhere else that we can reallocate. So there are a lot of strategies for reducing and reallocating costs as part of the network redesign process. And a lot of this just comes from making service more efficient, making sure that each and every bus that's out on the street is being, has the best and highest use of that resource. And so what we want to talk about is some of the service design trade-offs, which, as RJ said, it's not only about cost, it's also about priorities. There are just some service attributes you can't have both. You can't have service that's both fast and stops every block to pick up riders. So we have sometimes where there are competing goals, and we want to make sure that as we're designing the network, we're moving towards the goals that are going to best meet the mobility needs of the community. So we're going to be talking through each one of these in detail and asking you for your feedback on where the plan should fall in terms of kind of balancing these competing goals and trade-offs. So starting with frequency versus coverage. If you want to have service that's more frequent, you're investing more buses onto a single corridor. So when this happens, you're generally able to, you can increase frequency on these key corridors. You see here we have a lot of routes that are in green with 2 to 10 minute service, and not too many services operating every 60 minutes or less. But routes might be farther apart. There's less coverage, geographic coverage overall, routes going to fewer places, but you have faster, more frequent service. The kind of other side of the coin is if you have a network that's invested in coverage, you might see you have fewer frequent routes, less of the green, a lot more routes that are operating every 30 or 60 minutes, but routes are a lot closer together and service is more localized. So I'm going to go back to this one just to compare again, fewer routes, but better frequencies, or more routes, more coverage at lower frequencies. And so we're going to ask, in our first poll, where you fall on this scale, acknowledging that both, of course, are important, and, in terms of investing in frequency or providing coverage. And, we're just saying that looking at coverage, there are many ways to provide service to an area. Do you have an all day, all week fixed route bus service? Do you have a service that only provides trips, when there's specific demand? You have some sort of on-demand service in that area. So coverage can mean a lot of different things. So looking at investing in frequency or investing in coverage, and then, or are they equally important? Okay. Looks like we have all votes in, so I will go ahead and close the polls. Share results. Okay, so everyone landed pretty much right in the middle, acknowledging that both frequency and coverage are incredibly important when designing transit service, but results leaned a little bit more towards investing in frequency, with no votes saying that coverage is significantly more important than frequency. Okay, so we'll move into the next one. Talking about speed versus access. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, is really you have two competing goals. If you want service to be fast and you want to have short travel times from end to end, which, as you said at the beginning, was one of the top most desired service improvement. If you want shorter travel times, the bus has to travel fast along the street, which means it can't be making lots of twists and turns. It can't be stopping very often to pick up passengers. So this comes sort of at the, if you're prioritizing speed, you're not prioritizing access, because you might have to have farther distances between stops so that the bus can travel quickly. So this is just an example in the red scenario, where it might take 30 minutes of travel time to get from A to B, but the person living at this house only has a 1-minute walk to transit. Whereas in the purple scenario, it only takes 20 minutes to travel from end to end, but the person at this house has a 5-minute walk out to access service. So here what we've done is we've saved 10 minutes of travel time. We have a 4-minute longer walk. So we wanted to ask sort of the question, where you fall on the scale of, is it more important to have service that's faster but may have longer walks for riders to access service, or is it more important to have shorter walks to service with service getting closer to front doors of destinations but might have longer travel times? And when I'm talking about, longer walks, we're talking about, up to 5 minutes or a quarter mile between bus stops. Not talking about only having the bus stop every mile and having to walk a mile out to the bus. So just wanted to clarify that as well. Okay. Looks like we've got all those in. A couple more. All right, so end polling. So this one was a very clear vote for faster service being significantly more important, shorter walks. with 56% kind of in the more significantly more important, somewhat more important. So it looks like, you know, really see value in investing in faster service. Okay, so stop. The next one's talking about service by time of day. Right now, there's a lot of service that's, you know, heavily invested in those peak commute times, from like 6 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 6 p.m. And that's when there's most transit service, and that's when there's most ridership. Because as we've seen, you know, when there's more service, there's more riders. And you know, one of the things that we're looking at is that really when there's demand. So we have our two charts here. Shown in orange, this is NJ Transit service. So the percent of miles that are operated each hour of the day, and you can see you have a lot of service during those peak periods, and it really starts to taper off right around 7 o'clock at night, with very little service into the evenings. And then in green shows NJ Transit ridership by hour, which very clearly mirrors the service levels. And then in blue, these are general public, so people, you know, traveling throughout the region on all modes. You know, what's their distribution look like? And if you look, the bottom chart, this is just trips that start and end within Newark. It's very flat throughout the day, which means that demand, you know, in the midday is the same as it sort of is during the AM PM peaks. You see more congestion because people are tending to travel a lot farther, but there are a lot of, you know, trips being made with people going shopping, going to appointments, that really aren't being captured or served. And this goes back to the point I made earlier about 70% of trips on transit being used to get to work, but only 37% of all travel being work trips. So really wanting to see, you know, are there opportunities to increase transit during the middle of the afternoon or in evenings or on weekends to, you know, really increase transit's usefulness for other types of trips. So that brings us into our next poll. You know, should NJ Transit continue to focus service during the AM and PM peak periods, or should service be added during the midday, evenings, and on weekends to you know, really round out the service week and have more options throughout the week? And I think one of the things we might see as you know, emerge from the pandemic is a shift in some of the demand, with more people working from home, more people working from flexible schedules. Are we still going to have those rush hour periods? That's, you know, one thing everyone's really anxious to find out. All right. So here, this is interesting. Everyone's pretty evenly split right down the middle. So it looks like service options at all times of day are equally important. You know, not really at all a clear preference between the morning or the evening. So it looks like a balanced service week is most important. Okay, moving on to the next one. So, you know, traditionally, bus service, you think about bus service, you have you know, a fixed schedule, and the bus comes at this stop at this particular time, and it's going to follow a very specific alignment to get to the end of the route. And it's a very efficient way to transport a lot of people. But it has some limitations in serving some of those harder to reach areas that are more auto-centric, areas where there aren't a lot of people who live within walking distance of a major corridor. You know, in some of the more suburban areas we talked about earlier that don't really have the density or diversity of destinations. So there are some, you know, new and emerging options that have come on the market the last couple of years and over the last decade that provide some alternatives to fixed route service that are more on demand and sort of mirror like what you would expect from an Uber or a Lyft trip, where, you know, you're able to request a ride when you want to travel, and you'll be picked up, you know, either near your house or at kind of a preset bus stop, and then taken directly to your destination. And so there are some some service microtransit type services that can be operated by NJ Transit or sort of subsidized or approved by NJ Transit, so that you can have access to wheelchair equipped vehicles and have a guaranteed ride, but aren't necessarily a fixed route bus, and it has applications in certain areas like maybe major industrial parks where there are major shift changes only at certain times, so they don't need an all-day, all-week bus. Also, if you think about a bus trying to serve the front door of every single one of those businesses, that's going to be really hard to accomplish. It's going to result in a really, really long trip. But if you had an on-demand service where it could serve kind of each one of those businesses individually, that might make more sense in certain situations. So we're looking at sort of what the potential is for, should NJ Transit continue to invest in only fixed route service that may cover less geography, or in certain cases cover larger geography with a more on-demand service. And what I should emphasize before I open the poll is that fixed route transit is going to be the most effective way to transport large volumes of people. So in the core of the city, in the heart of the urban centers, they're going to have fixed route service because on average, the buses carry 43 passengers an hour. When looking at the microtransit on-demand service, that has a lot of limitations. If you're carrying people, like a taxi or an Uber from their start to their end point, you can really only complete 3 or 5 trips an hour. So it's really only geared towards specific circumstances and markets where it makes sense. So I'll go ahead and open this poll about continuing to invest in traditional transit or looking at some alternative options. Those are coming in. And I'll pause right now. Ryan, have there been any comments in the Q&A that?
Sure, Melissa. So the Q&A has been a little bit quieter this time, but we've had a few comments related to the length of the walk time. Just highlighting again, as in last session, the challenges of longer walks for people with disabilities, and highlighting the difference in safety in longer walks, versus like in the afternoon or 11 p.m. at night, like when it's dark out. We've also, we've seen a few comments on with those general sentiments, but overall a little bit quieter.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So I'll end this poll and share the results. So definitely leaning more towards fixed route service, which is consistent with what we saw in the first meeting as well. Having fixed route service somewhat more important, but understanding there may be a place for migrant transit service in circumstances where it makes sense. And then our fifth and final, before we move into the public comment section, is investing in transit priority. So public transit, when it's well utilized, is the most space efficient way to transport large volumes of people. And when we're in an area like Newark with lots of traffic congestion, narrow roads, high densities, lots of large populations, people trying to travel, space is really at a premium. So looking at ways to efficiently transport large volumes of people, trying to encourage people to ride mass transit as much as possible. One of the things that is shown in this graphic is really the amount of space that 50 people traveling on different modes takes up. So if you look at 50 pedestrians versus 50 cyclists, 50 people on a bus, and 50 people in cars, you can see that the bus really is the most space efficient way to transport people. But one of the things that makes bus service more attractive, and what you guys all voted for in the first poll, was shorter overall travel times. And one of the ways to have shorter travel times is to give buses priority on the road, to make transit more competitive with driving. You have a whole range of different options in the toolbox, like transit signal priority. So a traffic light will turn green when it sees a bus approaching, or all the way up to dedicated bus lanes where buses are in their own right of way. Of course, if you are going to be prioritizing buses and bus speeds, that might come at the cost of spaces for private vehicles and private vehicle speed. So wanted to sort of gauge reactions. Gauge reactions in terms of how street space should be prioritized between different modes. And this is our last poll. And then after this, we're going to move into public comment period. Looks like almost everyone's voted. Okay, great. So here we go. Looks like everybody came to the right meeting tonight. Glad we have a lot of transit advocates in the group. Looks like most people really think it's important to be prioritizing transit speeds to improve transit service and make it better for everyone. So with that, I will pass it back to Ryan, I believe, to talk a little bit about sort of the next steps.
Okay, so the next steps for our public and stakeholder engagement will take place most likely in June, once we have some actual draft recommendations. So between now and then, we're going to go back and double down on the analysis, look at the feedback you all are providing us at this meeting and at the meeting we had this afternoon. We also did a customer survey. We're going to go dig into all of that and really think carefully about drafting a network plan that will be very preliminary, but we're going to then bring the public back into this in late spring, early summer. And as part of the process, in between now and then, you can continue to stay engaged with the project. We have a project website at njtransit.com/NewBus. We have some new content that just launched on the site today, including an interactive mapping feature called a story map that you can all take a look at, that delves into some of our data and analysis efforts more deeply. And you can continue to also provide feedback to us by email at newbus@njtransit.com or via social media. We really appreciate the effort that you all are making to come out and participate in this process. And we really do take the feedback that you provide very seriously, and it will ultimately help us deliver a better project that meets the needs of our local community.